Shalom and welcome again to Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. I'm your host, Rabbi Richard Address. Thank you very much for joining us. We invite you to visit the website, jewishsacredaging.com, the Facebook page, Jewish Sacred Aging on Facebook. And if you have a comment or a concern or a suggestion about future podcasts, please feel free to email me at rabbiaddress@jewishsacredaging.com. And likewise, if you or your organization would like to sponsor a series of these podcasts, just drop me an email at that address and we'll take it from there. Rumor has it that in the contemporary Jewish world, in synagogues, organizations, that money is something that every once in a while comes up in the conversation. And so I thought it would be a really, really good idea to invite an expert on this. And we welcome to today's Seekers of Meaning, Rabbi Shawn Zevit, an author, teacher at the Olive Seminary, Reconstructionist Rabbinic College, and Rabbi of Mishkan Shalom here in suburban Philadelphia, just across the river from where I am right now, to talk about Shawn's new book, the second edition of Offerings of the Heart, Money, Values, and Faith in Community. So, Baruch haba, welcome, Shawn. It's nice to see you. It's nice to see you.
Lovely to see you. Great to see you. And thank you for your decades of work and for your reaching out about this topic and your willingness to engage.
It's a really important topic. We have lots to discuss. Let me go right to the beginning. In the foreword by a colleague, Mordechai Liebling, I'm going to quote this because it's a really super quote. Healthy congregations seek to build a sacred community. Running a congregation requires dealing with money, collecting and allocating resources, though many attempt to deny it. There is no way around it. Therefore, we need to learn how to infuse our financial decision-making with a consciousness of God, That's a great, great opening line. Your work in this area of trying to bring this consciousness of God to the financial aspect. What's the genesis of this, Shawn? What led you to this?
Thank you. Thank you for reading that quote, actually. And as part of responding, I'm going to ante up and meet you one Liebling with another Liebling, because as part of that forward towards the end, Mordechai quotes this Jewish teaching. A traveling preacher once arrived in a town and proceeded to teach at the synagogue. One man asked him, "Who do you work for?" The preacher hired that man to be his traveling companion for one purpose, to ask him throughout the day, "Who do you work for?" And, I remember Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi, a blessed memory, someone asking him, isn't a synagogue or a faith community a business? And he said, yes, but what business are you in? And so that aspect of being a sacred community of souls, of a change agent in the world, of a container and purveyor of Jewish tradition and change as well. These are all really important things. And so, this issue is not something that came to me easy, Richard, I will say. I explore this in my introduction to the book of my own journey around class and money, and not, seeking work that had a lot of that initially, when I began working for the Reconstructionist movement post RRC. That was the first job with a guaranteed salary and benefits that I ever had in my life. And I, left rabbinical school, with debt as well. So it's been a long path to deal with these issues. So I don't want to come across as the expert, like you graciously said before. I'm a learner and a journeyer with it. And as part of my work, I worked with Rabbi Liebling at JRF, it was called at the time, was to go around the country with different workshops for leaders. And the initial one was on communal growth. And as we were touring that around, the issue of money and Jewish values, the issue of purchasing and building buildings or investments and coming of age as a movement, different trajectory than in, say, the reform and conservative movements, which were older, was a real live issue. And so the second year I was there, I began to develop, with the support of Mordechai, also Jeffrey Dacrow, the whole idea of Torah of money, creating an interactive workshop and getting the best practices from the field of communities so that people could teach each other, as well as ground in Jewish sacred text, in values-based approaches and budgeting. And that was often the greatest inspiration for people. Yes, they learned techniques from each other, but what really changed people was the rich heritage that we have and seeing themselves in the lineage of aspirational work right from it's tough times. Yeah, well, tell it to our ancestors who started a building campaign right out of Egypt. They didn't wait till landing in a place of promise. It was, here's how we're going to organize our resources around a sacred center. And we're going to have all these different avenues. If you've got more, you can give here. If you could volunteer, if you got a half shekel, it's like if all you got is $18, everyone's in. So everybody knows everyone has contributed the very minimum. These were things we even were working out as our peoplehood was beginning to take form. So it's challenged me, this work, and it's grown me in many ways to move through some of my own internalized fear or reluctance to engage it. And certainly in the last 13 years, being a congregational rabbi, having building campaigns, working with self-assessed dues systems and helping people connect their spiritual life and their resources, it's been quite a journey that way, and it continues.
You just mentioned the self-assessed dues systems and the experimentation in many congregations over the last decade or so of no dues, moving off of a flat fee, of fair share, of what you call self-assessed. It always goes back to those texts in Torah, which talk about you're giving the truma, the gifts, as your heart so moves you. And then you have that, I think it's Talmudic or Pirkei Avot, Ein Kemach, Ein Torah. You have to have one to have the other. When you teach this concept of as your heart so moves you in the connection of finances, how do you spin that? How do you teach that?
It goes to the heart, if I may use that term in this case, of the title of the book itself, because you're kind of drawing a highlighter under that. I mean, this book could have been titled any number of things, but there was something for me out of the way that resources are referred to from biblical times to now, that Nadiv Lev, the aspect of whatever you've got, bring your contribution, whether it's volunteer time or resources or money or, making the challah, whatever it may be, that everything is acceptable as part of that culture of giving. That felt like the most compelling to me. And in fact, in the 20 plus years since the first and the new edition, one of the things that changed, Richard, was actually the title that Bloomsbury supported, moving it from the original Offerings of the Heart, Money and Values in Faith Community to Offerings of the Heart, Money, Values, and Faith in Community. I looked at the title and I said, that doesn't resonate as much anymore. It's the combination of those three. And whether you're in a congregation, organization, a synagogue, mosque, church, at the federation, or in a nonprofit, or in a corporation or organization, these are values that can go with you and help people feel more, inspired to give as well. I remember, I don't know if you've ever done this, like looking at your pension plan, et cetera, and sort of seeing what are the values-based, investments. And I was struck when I did that the first time and saw so interesting that the organizations in the values socially responsible investment portfolio were actually 80% were the same in the other ones. They were the same corporations that were doing the best under those filters were actually doing the best in general. It wasn't just relegated to the socially responsible investment. There was something about social responsibility and values-based work that created the most profitable organizations, the longer-term commitment of employees, the greater equity and diversity that enabled places to flourish. So I think that that's a deep teaching of our tradition as well that resonates through today.
So many congregations have had this, and organizations too, have had this values-based conversation where the clergy person often will say, remember, our budget is a reflection of Jewish values. And you could tell the real sense of what an organization or a congregation holds as its true values by how it spends its money. React to. I mean, I'm sure this has come up in all the workshops.
Never. I have no idea what you're talking about.
Well, that's just a shot in the dark.
Okay. I'll just improvise.
Just wing it. That's right.
You're right on. And one of the exercises I like doing went in doing workshops on this. One is personal. I'll sometimes have a little basket, one for the cell phones and the other for the wallets. And I ask people to put their wallets in as we come into the room and just leave them in pure view. It's not like they disappear. I ask people to say, if I found your wallet on the sidewalk, and of course I'm going to return it to you, if I open it up, what will I find in there that represents who you truly want to be in the world? Or are all the things in there not really representative of your values? And then similarly, like you identified on a communal level, organizational level, how are the values reflected in your budget? So taking the statement of principles or the mission statement, or who you say you are on your website, and having that next to the budget and now say compare and contrast, it's amazing what happens, because some people will say, oh, we're all about education. We're all about kids. We're all about justice. And then you look at the budget and go, right, to the tune of $43 a year.
Right.
So if we're going to do this alignment, we actually have to be able to track that spending, that investment in staff or projects or tzedakah collectives or whatever it may be, so that you can trace it back to who we say we are. Otherwise, there's a disjunct between spirit and resource. And one thing I point out in the book is many of the listeners, particularly if they're Jewish, will be familiar with Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu Adonai Echad, and Ve'ahavta, and you will love the divine with all your heart, spirit. And thank you, King James, but strength was not a great translation because it's me'od. So if you give me something and I say, oh, Tov, or how are you doing? Tov me'od, I'm doing very well. It's about wellness and muchness. And the rabbis translated me'od into your resources, financial and material resources. So if you want to serve the divine, you need heart and soul, and you need an alignment in terms of that which you have, even if you don't have much. It's such a powerful teaching that I was introduced to through the research for the book, that there's no pure welfare state in Jewish life, that if I'm getting tzedakah from the community because I'm stretched on resources, I still have to give a tithing of that tzedakah back to the communal kuppah, the supply place, right? Because there's always somebody else who is in need, not only myself. And just that particular, idea of the half shekel, of a minimal amount. So I try to counsel people, support everyone, don't have any barriers, but don't just give away stuff, because that doesn't inculcate a sense of, I'm invested. Here's my $5. That's the most I can afford, or whatever I can do self-assessed dues wise, which I know I arrived at Mishkan Shalom just as we changed our dues system to that. And we've actually met or even exceeded our dues goal almost every year. And now it's not just dues, right? We want to take a look at, there's a variety of ways that people contribute to any number of things, and that should be counted as well. So you don't want to look at resources and allocation from just one silo any more than the Torah has multiple inroads to contribute. So I wanted to get back to that. You asked about the dues, and I recognize it's a difficult issue. And one other thing I guess I want to say, Richard, is we'll internalize things too. Even with our system, I often have to catch some folks who end up with less resource or are struggling, lost a job, especially in the last few years in COVID, and go, well, you haven't renewed. Well, I know you leave it up to me to give whatever, but I felt embarrassed. I felt a sense of shame about not being able to give what I used to give. No, we actually mean that. If you've got that 180 and you used to give 1,800, someday you'll be able to do that again, but we're here to carry each other. And if you've got more than that, then please contribute that too, which people do to offset, that way. We, in fact, generated one amazing generous gift as somebody gave us a 5-year gift to cover dues alleviation for folks who are self-assessing less than the suggested minimum, to make that 60% of the budget, so that the community would not be debited from supporting those who couldn't give the amount. And that was such an inspiring thing to do, that they wanted to make sure that the collective was enabled and empowered to not take a hit for making sure that we didn't have that as a barrier. But there's still that internalized piece which we wrestle, and I know I still wrestle today with that.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you're talking about also, I'm hearing, is this concept of a holistic approach to the finances, the desilalization of it, and the understanding that the giving of oneself from one's own heart may not necessarily be money. That's the strength of the part of the title of the faith in community, because it is one community, and everybody has a gift. So many places just think of the gift as the money, but so much of and I'm sure in Mishkan Shalom, the congregation I was involved with recently, the giving of oneself and volunteer and time also has to be lifted up and praised. You have in the beginning of the book this concept, which I think you just alluded to, called Yishur Olam. Yishur Olam, to improve the quality of life around him or her, to quote the book. Walk me through what you mean by that. Yishur Olam.
Many people will be familiar with the word shalom, right? Which means peace, hello, goodbye. You say hello, I say shalom, 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 to quote the Beatles. But it also comes from the root word shalem, which means wholeness. And what's such an amazing evolution in the Hebrew language is that the word to pay was evolved as lishalem, right? In other words, to ensure wholeness, to ensure that the other person feels a sense of complete, and that in fact, halachically through Jewish tradition and custom and law, that if I sold you something and it came back and it was broken, or it ended up being an overreach or whatever, and you didn't feel shalem, whole with that, you had the right to come back and say, this was not a complete purchase. It's only when the other person felt whole with the interchange that it was, that was the receipt. So looking at that, whether it's how we invest in tzedakah, how we study our tradition and then make these values-based decisions. So I work a lot with our B'nai Mitzvah around this, where we have a fund. People are encouraged not to give gifts to each other, but to invest in a fund, and then we study this material. And then with the kids, we decide what issue and then what organization is going to get 50% of the B'nai Mitzvah fund every year. And then the other 50% goes to tuition alleviation for families that might not be able to pay the weight of that. And every year, within a half an hour, they have identified the issue and the organization, because it releases energy to have a sense of that yeshua, of that enrichment and that engagement, of the soul in that way. So those are just some of the very, the different ways that I think one can, work with this.
I'm trying to do that with my grandchildren once a year, and have them decide of an organization that's something that they touch on to make a donation. So to get them into the habit of, even as teenagers, getting them into the habit of doing what you're doing with the B'nai Mitzvah kids.
Right. Can I give a little plug for my wife, Rabbi Simcha Zevit, who at our family Seder in Cleveland this year, she did a similar riff to you, and she made all these different pieces of matzah on fabric and hid them around the house. So there was the search for the afikomen, but there was search for puzzle pieces to make a whole matzah. And there was an envelope that went with each piece. There was a different tzedakah. So after the matzah had been made whole, shleimut, then she sat with all the kids and they made a decision about where the money in the envelope would go, which tzedakah. And so just that building on a thing we're already doing, but having them running around the house, getting the actual afikomen, but creating this other thing, I thought was such a great way of engaging them.
No, it's great, because a lot of these kids, to be blunt about it, they live a pretty good life. And any way we can teach them that this is part of their responsibility as a Jew, and that there are other people, and it feels good, and all the stuff that So that's a great idea with the matzah.
I think especially now in our day, Richard, that on one hand, I was so grateful to be given the support to try a new edition. And already as soon as it was published, I thought, there's some things that are out to date, because, look at this nefarious use, or the shadow side of this within the Jewish community or the larger world, or what's going on in the use of natural resources. And there's not enough money to support well-being, but there's enough money for military events and things like that, that there's a lot that challenges this. It's not about myopic. The journey that I tried to articulate in the book is not to be, just altruistic and pretend there aren't issues or bad actors, but it's also to lift up our people's journey over millennia to keep reaching for what's possible, soulful and spiritual and mutually of benefit to people and to the planet itself, and as I say, back to the socially investment, wouldn't, surprise, surprise, that often makes for the best profit. I like to say that our tradition invites profit, but Prophet. So we're for profit, but not Profit.
Right. I remember teaching this to congregations when they would talk about the business of the synagogue. I said, the business of the product, you can't measure your product because as somebody once wrote it, your product is a changed human being. And in essence, that change could take years, because every colleague I know, who works, especially in congregations or teaching, it may be 10, 15, 20 years later where somebody will walk up to you and say, Rabbi Zevit, I remember something you said at confirmation class, and it stuck with me and it influenced me. And you plant that seed and you don't know when it's going to blossom. That's the business, quote unquote, of what it means to be part of a community. We're planting these seeds, and sometimes you can't measure it right away. It's impossible. That's why it's sacred. You write about this, the linkage of tzedakah to spirituality and understanding tzedakah not in the sense of charity, but of justice. So could you unpack that a little bit, especially in light of how we invest our money in socially responsible things? And the reality of all this BDS stuff too, it's implied in so many of the anti-Semitic acts that are running around, and investment and redoing investments and stuff like that. I mean, I know that this is a whole sermon, which you don't have to give right now, but it's in the book. I mean, this linkage between spirituality and tzedakah really being justice.
Well, thank you for raising that. And I make no claim of that being some original vantage point, because it's embedded in our people's legacy and in the word itself. If you do the etymology of it, and I love tracing words, and the fact that Hebrew comes, mostly from 2 or 3 letter roots, and that expands the fact that tzedakah comes from the word tzedek, meaning righteousness or justice, and where even the Torah asks us to pursue it actively, not just to expect justice to be manifest any more than democracy or many of the things that we treasure are just going to self-perpetuate without our investment that way on all levels of it. So we come naturally by that idea, and that's different than caritas, the root of charity, which means a caring or a loving act. So I think the way, at least I was raised, it wasn't like, are you driven to care? Do you really like that or love that person? No, you're compelled to do the right thing, and feelings are involved, but that's not just the basis. And so there was always a pushka, or giving a tithing, or give $18 to this or to what, in honor of the deceased person, in honor of this event, and these places to try to bolster community, and knowing that today I have resources and tomorrow I may not, and it'll switch around. The Rambam's, who's a wonderful physician, so it's not surprising, he charts 9 months of becoming a full member of community in the Middle Ages. And it starts with this support, it ends with burying the dead and being given that opportunity to be held that way yourself. But he charged 3 months increments of increasing commitment through resources and time and support in the way you articulated earlier. And that at 9 months, you're born into being a full member of the community, because you've expanded your stake, your investment, almost like a co-op, but you are also now the beneficiary. And if you haven't invested, you're not automatically a beneficiary, even though the community is there for you at those times too. So I think that that's an important thing to lift up around tzedakah, and also to ask ourselves tough questions, whether it's around where investments are happening around, in the Middle East or here at home, or checking out the charitable giving, websites to say how much I may be fond of an organization, but if 50% is going to staples and copy paper, that's not the best investment of my dollar, or, if they're prejudicing one people or, over another, or I think being able to ask ourselves, where's this, money going and how is it connected to Jewish values? We have to ask ourselves, our tradition compels us to look at the tough questions, around this and know that we have impact, especially in a world in which we live intermingled with many other people. And so if we throw around the privilege that, some of us have been able to aspire to in North America, and for those who have more resources than others, that's going to have impact on how people view Jewish life to begin with. It doesn't matter what quotes we throw out. And if people, especially within the Jewish community or outside, feel that there's going to be punitive measures used by that, or jobs deprived, or, things withheld that way, we have to say we're not immune to those prejudices Jewishly. And I think that's where Offerings of the Heart also says, do this audit, make sure that you ask the tough questions and don't just throw resources without asking them.
Again, we're speaking with Rabbi Shawn Zevit, the Rabbi of Mishkan Shalom here in suburban Philadelphia, about his new book, the second edition of Offerings of the Heart, Money, Values, and Faith in Community. And for my colleagues and people who, let's say, financial vice presidents of congregations or organizations, when you get the book, please pay particular attention to the appendix, because in the back, there's a sample lesson introducing membership to Jewish values, money, and your community. It's a very, very valuable part of the book. And the book is available at Shawn, just run real quick, the usual
Bloomsbury.com, I think, is the website. You can find it through them, and they have a better discount than some of the other places right now available as well. And it's in ebook, it's in hard and soft copy as well.
And if somebody wanted to get in touch with you just to pursue some of this, or perhaps bring you to their community to talk about this in more depth, is there a I'm going to suggest, there may be a website or something that somebody could email you or contact. What would that be?
You might go to rabbizevit.com and you'll find ways of you getting a hold of me, or through Mishkan Shalom as well, certainly available in that way. And Richard, I know we talked in the prep a moment. Could I share one thing about this program yesterday?
Oh, yeah. Last month.
Well, it actually literally was just on Shabbat, where to exemplify this whole conversation, our fundraising chair said, we'd like to celebrate the new edition of your book and kind of throw you an oneg and have some conversation about this. And I'm blessed that Rabbi Mordechai Liebling is actually a founding member of the congregation. So he joined me, and we'd never had the opportunity to both read from the beginning of the book. But what struck me is, after we had shared that piece, there's a little very simple graphic in one of the sections of the book, maybe around organizing resources, where it says, where are you in your community or organization functioning around the transparency of money and values? Is it only in crisis time you talk about it? Is it closed behind closed doors? Is it much more open and ongoing? And which quadrant are you kind of in to do a self-assessment? And it just struck me, by having the conversation afterwards, what unfolded was a number of the women talking about the challenges to women's empowerment around finances and what they were facing in the larger world, not in the synagogue, but getting credit cards when they were part of partnerships, or after a deceased partner, or people talking about different gender identities, or some of the internalized, fear, or the impact now of not having had resources earlier. And that continued in Facebook and in emails subsequent. So to the point of this isn't just about sustaining your community. This is about providing freedom. Here we are on the other side of Pesach, liberation from the constraints and the narrowness of living this in isolation, not being able to say, I need a little bit of help here, I can help you a little bit later, in that way, and gemilut chasadim, acts of loving kindness in that regard. So, how popular crowdfunding has become these days as well, when people feel there's added value that they get involved. So I was just really moved by the many topics that arose, Richard, from this conversation that weren't just about the content of the book, but were about feeling liberated to name and deal with the challenges in life, to money and values in general.
Because, Sean, push comes to shove, the bottom line is money is an everyday experience. And you talk about the narrow places, you talk about being bound and enslaved, or in the work that we do in Jewish sacred aging, what we call the economics of aging. Talk about values and money. You have people in your congregation, you have significant numbers of the Jewish community who may reach a situation where, to be able to afford to go into an assisted living facility, they can't afford it.
Sure. Well, in many cities, like more than 20% of the Jewish community is living at or below the poverty line.
And the tradition's approach to single payer plan and how you pay for healthcare and the responsibility of the community, this is all part of this conversation. And that's why that linkage of tzedakah and spirituality and justice is so powerful, because these are grassroots, everyday issues. It's not in the Luft. It's not out. It's, if I need to go into a facility and I can't afford to buy in to a CCR, continuing care ground community, and if my adult children have to pay for a 6-hour a day aide to come in, where is that money? Because if they spend it for that, there may be something else that's not being spent on.
Right. We actually have an initiative here in Northwest Philly called Shtetl 2.0, in which many of our communities are getting together to see how we can share resources, provide mutual support to keep people in home, and do it through our communities. But when you were saying that, Richard, I so appreciate the connections you're making, because it's everything that was important to me about the book that way. But I remember one of the early workshops I did, and there was a congregational president who was like, this is to everybody out there going, well, it's such a sweet conversation they're having, it's a nice softball, but, when the rubber meets the road, it's not real. And there was this president who, said, I can't raise money. It's too overwhelming for me. I can't do whatever. And we were studying these texts, some of which we've cited today. And she stood up and she said, wait a minute, I'm not fundraising. The funds aren't dead and I need to raise them from the dead. They're already there. I'm helping to organize resources. And in fact, I'm connecting people with the mitzvah. I can do that. Now I feel inspired. And she went home and launched twice the size of campaign that they were originally going to do, and achieved the goal of hiring a rabbi in the way that they wanted, because she got over that internal barrier. And so this is not just about good feeling. This is about producing real results that you can also then go to sleep at night going, I haven't ruined the earth or injured people on the other way. And I'm, Lador Vador, in enabling generations to continue to work with whatever they have.
Yes, ultimately, as you alluded to in this present, it is about building relationships. It is about relationships. Before we run out of time, I do want to get your take on this really great quote from the beginning from Bavli Baba Batra, which says, the Talmud teaches one who wishes to acquire wisdom should study the ways of the society, for there is no greater area of Torah study than this. It is like an ever-flowing stream. I mean, right now in our country, it may be a little polluted. It's a great quote. I mean, to study the ways of society, to acquire wisdom. That is another high holiday sermon, which you're not getting now. Why is that the very, very, very first quote that you allude to in the book?
No, that's beautiful. Yeah, it's a mic dropper. And I want to thank our sages of ancient time for lifting it up. And also Rabbi Toba Spitzer, a dear friend and colleague in Boston, who exposed me to that text for the first time. And, it felt a really compelling place to begin, because first of all, it doesn't just refer to resources. You can look at it and go, we also need to do a systems analysis. Where is prejudice built in? Where is class, and any other oppressions built into the system we need to learn from and deconstruct, as well as support in that way. And it's also about living in the world, not going, we don't have a tradition that has us, I mean, you go back to the Essenes and there are other streams of our traditions, but is generally about living in society and living with the tension of the material and the spiritual, and seeing that ruchaniyut and gashmiyut, that spirit in the material and vice versa, as opposed to one being good and one being evil. And so I think that, the Talmud's directive in that moment, which includes on how we educate our children, is not to be away on the hillside studying aphorisms and teachings and then showing up and behaving totally opposite in anti-Torah ways, but is taking a look, ultimately comes back to something you said at the beginning. If you want to study how your community, organization, congregation is actually, what they're spending on and how we're spending it, that'll tell you ultimately what the values is, not just the front page of the website or the great three-liners, etc. Kind of follow the money. I think in Jewish terms, it's, also saying that, but it's also saying build the society through whatever resource you have that you can feel proud of, as opposed to having to hide out from.
Sean, thank you very much. I'm going to, this is something just came to me. Do you have the copy of the book right there with you?
I do.
Could you open up to page 117? And the reason why I'm going to do this, one of the workshops we do in Jewish Sacred Aging is called New Rituals for New Life Stages. And the power of ritual is overwhelming now, and more people are turning to the need for ritual. But you have this bracha that I imagine you wrote on page 117.
Yes.
Blessed are you, source of abundance. I think it's a great way to close this conversation about offerings of the heart. So could you do it? You give us the honor of just reading that.
Thank you, Richard. And this is why we pay you the big bucks. You are right on. Right. This is how I actually close my teaching on it too. So your intuition is right on. Blessed are you, source of abundance, for providing us with financial and spiritual abilities to give. You reveal to us in our actions that all humanity participates in the flow of resources that come and go through the world. May we use our resources well, and may this exchange be fair and equal. Blessed are you, provider, who is the enriching power of life itself.
Amen. It's a great bracha. Rabbi Shawn Zevit, thank you very, very much. Continued success, stay healthy, and hopefully we'll bump into each other maybe sometime soon. But continue the good work, and toda rabah.
Right back at you. Thank you, Chaber, so much for making the time for this.
To all of you, thank you very much for joining us on today's edition of Seekers of Meaning, the podcast TV arm of Jewish Sacred Aging. Again, if you'd like to help support our work, if you go to the website, you'll find a conveniently located donate button. Just click on that, follow the prompts. It's real simple. And again, if your organization or synagogue or a program would like to sponsor some of these podcasts, again, just email me, rabbidress@jewishsacredaging.com. A big shout out to our producer, Steve Lubetkin, for these podcasts are produced through the facilities of Lubetkin Media in gorgeous, beautiful, calming Cherry Hill, New Jersey. So to all of you, until we meet again on the next Seekers of Meaning, stay safe, everyone. Stay healthy. We wish for you for long life and peace. And most of all, be kind to one another. Shalom and todah.